Recording in progress, another episode of the Score and Compass podcast, back on the Grand Lodge Candidate Series, round 2022. This is the second time doing it. I did it 2021 as well. And it is great. This is the second interview in the series thus far with Right Worshipful Brother Art Cecco. Standard caveats apply. All candidates are invited. This is not meant as endorsement of any one particular candidate. Anybody from Ontario, any Mason from Ontario watching this, I've included information in the description to this video on how you can vote, take part in Grand Lodge, all that good jazz. All the things I'm supposed to say. There you go. And with that, Right Worshipful Sir, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Cameron.
So let's start with the basics. If you could introduce yourself and just which lodges are you from?
I'm, well, my name is Art Cecco. My mother lodge is Ionic Lodge No. 25 out of Toronto Don Valley District. We had the pleasure of participating and serving the craft for quite some time. It's something that I find very important, something that means a great deal to me. And at the same time, the craft, I believe, has so much to offer. And it's a pleasure to serve the craft in perpetuating that forward.
I want to ask you right there, something that you said, which I hope you can expand on a little bit. The craft having so much to offer. When you say that, to whom do you think the craft has things to offer? Is it to its membership, to the community, to membership families? How do you think? What do you think Freemasonry has to offer, and I guess to whom does it have those things to offer?
Well, before we could really understand what it has to offer to the community, I think we need to understand what it has to offer to us. Because once we can establish what the impact that the craft has had to us personally, then we can, go forward and not necessarily, stand on a soapbox on it, but show the community and the people around us what the craft has done for us. The best testimonial of what the craft is how it's impacted us in our lives, how it's impacted us personally, how it's impacted us with the people around us, within our vocations, all of those things. And we may not see it right off the bat, but I can tell you just from past experiences and testimonials from others that the people around those who belong to the craft have seen that difference, whether it's their spouse, whether it's their friends, whether it's the people around them within their vocations, and also those who will testify to how it's impacted them in such a positive way.
To what extent do you think that, I don't know if drop the ball is the right expression, but we'll go with that for the time being until I can think of a better expression. To what extent do you think your Masonry, whether it be at the Grand Lodge level, the Lodge level, has dropped the ball in terms of communicating those impacts to, from the membership to the public, communicating what Freemasonry means to us as Masons, either at an individual level or in relationship to how it's impacted and made us better in our day-to-day lives?
I really don't think that anybody has dropped the ball in any of the levels. I think it's understanding how we want to communicate it. When we look at Masonry as a whole, like the central message has always been there. Okay, but over the course of history, we've always had to adapt to societal change, and how we communicate it has always been something that we've had to adapt to. In this particular case, I would say now society is changing exponentially. Okay, so we have to stay on top of how that communication is done, still maintaining, okay, the virtues and pretty well all of the things that are important to Masonry, still maintaining those levels, like our rituals, our our different approaches to our protocols. Those are all part and parcel of what keeps Masonry at that level. Okay, it's how we communicate it that we're constantly having to adapt to. And I think we find ourselves in a situation where it's been impacted on so many different levels, like the social medias being one, the pandemic having had an impact, because part of the communication component of Masonry, which has always been built in, is that I would have to say mouth to ear, the fraternal component, the fellowship. That's always been one way of communicating among brethren, but at the same time, that just sort of permeates into society in the way we act and what we do. When society continues to change as it has right now in such a big way, with social medias is taking a big part of it, we still have to try to understand how that's going to work as far as a communicational component, okay, and how we communicate our message, as Masons.
It's interesting, this being my second interview, previously interviewed Reverend Brother Cialtis. One thing that both you and him touched on, or you're touching on right now, is communication. That is something that came up in the previous interview, coming up now. When we discuss communication, I guess, how important do you think it is, and how can Freemasonry and Freemasons leverage different ways of communicating? And when I speak of communicating, I'm speaking both of communication between Grand Lodge and the districts level, districts and lodges, masters and membership, but also the craft as a whole and the larger community, and even different jurisdictions. How important is that communication, and do you think it's possible for that communication to be improved, and different techniques perhaps better leveraged, or even older techniques, going back to snail mail, using that more, because there's all sorts of studies that show people love getting physical mail because we're so inundated with emails. This is a very broad question, but generally speaking,
it's interesting that you say that, because we're constantly inundated with different methods of communication. Okay, and how much time do we all have? Okay, to be in tune with all of it, whether it's going to be through email, whether it's going to be through physical communication in the sense of what you just mentioned, like letters, summonses, things of that nature. But at the same time, I've always, from what I've seen, as far as the most effective approach is the one-to-one, the visitation of the brethren to the different lodges. Now, with that visitation, okay, you may hold office with Grand Lodge, and that message that you bring has much more impact when it's done on a personal level, as opposed to trying to send out communication in the written form, whether it be through email, whether it be through some of the other methods, written communications. When we see too much of it, it's the human condition that they're going to prioritize what they read, and that through emails, that becomes a bit of an issue, depending on just how busy you may be, how busy the brethren may be. And how they prioritize that kind of communication. So that is important, sending out those kind of messages. But I think being backed up with personal conversations, that's always been the best approach Masonry has always had. It's always been built in, whether it was through one-to-one lodge meetings, visitation in different parts of the district, different parts of the jurisdiction. That combined with the one-to-one. That's always had the most impact, because it has been the built-in format of communication within Masonry.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially on the importance of visitation and being there physically and in person. One place that a lot of us will be physically and in person and visiting again, or visiting for the first time, I guess, would be July 20th, 21st, the Grand Lodge annual communication in Sheraton Parkway. But
Yep.
this is a very interesting year because it's the first year, to my knowledge, that we've kind of had a combined Grand Lodge between virtual in the sense of voting, still
Yep.
being virtual, and in person.
Yes.
What are your thoughts as to maintaining the virtual voting with the in-person communication aspect of it? And do you think, just in your opinion, not speaking for Grand Lodge, but do you suspect that that's here to stay, that the virtual voting is going to remain a part of the Grand Lodge communication?
I think,
Hybrid, or what do you
I'm
see
sorry.
coming down the line?
Yeah, apologies. I think that remains to be seen depending on how the acceptance is taken by the brethren. I think what the pandemic has done is it's forced us to really review the different forms of communication and how effective they can be in what we do. The virtual component has helped, and it has helped in many ways. With regards to not only on a Grand Lodge level, but also at the district and the lodge levels for particular meetings, committee meetings. Board of general purpose meetings, for lodges, districts, and I think that the brethren have, for lack of a better frame, the lack of framing it better, have been sort of been forced kicking and screaming into using it, but it's definitely something that's here to stay. So taking advantage of it and at the same time seeing the benefits of it is one thing, but you can't replace the in-person approach to Masonry as well. Okay, like I had mentioned earlier, that in itself is a huge component of what Masonry is really all about: the fellowship, the coming together, the in-person interaction. That cannot be taken away, because it is a huge and an integral part of our craft.
In your experience, as Freemasonry has begun to, or as Freemasonry begins to return to in-person meetings in Ontario, what has your experiences been like? You and I have attended some events together, which, from my perspective, seem to be very well attended, and a lot of enthusiasm, people excited to be returning to in-person meetings. Are you finding that there's a lot of enthusiasm, hesitation? What has your experience been in talking with members about the return to in-person meetings and in-person Freemasonry?
I think that from and it's somewhat premature at this point, simply because we've just started to entertain the in-person meetings. I think we're seeing a bit of both. We're seeing excitement of the brethren coming together, having not been able to do that for over 2 years. We've seen how the brethren are reacting to it. Those who are prepared to attend, they're happy to see the brethren. They're happy for the interaction and the fellowship. That's very, very dear to them. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, you're still going to see some trepidation. Some brethren and some lodges are still not prepared. Okay, simply because of what is really going on with regards to the pandemic. There's still quite a bit of infection going on. So you're seeing a bit of both. But I do believe that once there's more of a comfort level in the comfort zone, you'll probably see more and more lodges start to come through and start to open up for in-person meetings. To a great extent, some have put targets on their opening dates, but I'm seeing a bit of both.
I really like what you said. The word you used there, premature. That is something that I struggle with. I think a lot of Masons struggle with when they are looking at the craft, looking at Freemasonry, either becoming perhaps too forlorn, or down in the dumps, if things don't seem to be going well, or they can become very excited when things seem to be going incredibly well, as opposed to perhaps taking a bit of a longer view on it, and I do like what you said there. We are in Ontario still it's relatively early in the return to in-person meetings, especially the return to in-person meetings with the limitation or restrictions.
Yeah.
Obviously, because we were complying as all Masons should, right, with the provincial requirements, which are lessening. Do you think that Freemasons, this is just something I'm concerned about. From your perspective, it seems, and I'm curious your comments on this, it seems that oftentimes Freemasons can jump to conclusions or become very concerned or very excited without taking the proper time to see how things play out and turn out, I guess, what are your thoughts on that, and the importance for lodges, and even at the Grand Lodge level, not to rush things and to take their time, and not to be too, if they are cautious and nervous, it's okay to take their time a little bit. Or if they're excited, be excited. But, just keep on working and trying to move forward at making a steady pace.
I think basically has continued to keep on working throughout all of this and trying to find its footing. Okay, considering what they've had to do, what the craft has had to deal with. But I know that from and I wouldn't say that I wouldn't specify that just for any level. I think to a great degree, districts and Grand Lodge, brethren and committees have been working. They have, but what they've had to do though is deal with whatever restrictions they've had to deal with, and still try to accommodate as the last couple of years have gone by. The work is still being done. The brethren are anxious to see certain things, and you can see just by the publications that are going out on a monthly basis that the brethren have been working. The craft is in motion. Okay, it's just the trepidation that's out there because of the pandemic restrictions as to which way we should be accepting that. But other than that, I think the craft has been moving, and the brethren have been working. There's been a lot of work that's been done, and a lot of material that's out there to just to prove that. So I think what you're probably going to see as we start to open up a little bit more, there'll be a bit more of a relaxed approach, because the brethren are knowing that it's inevitable. The craft will be back to normal, and if not, in a better state.
One metric or one way to measure the work that a lodge is doing is Grand Lodge's Cornerstone Program.
Absolutely.
And that's, I believe my first communications ever with you was in relation to the Cornerstone Program.
As a matter of fact, I recall exactly that meeting when we came out and presented for you. I remember that day.
And that was I'm proud to say I'm a member of 2 Cornerstone lodges, Windsor 403, Harmony 579. And because you were, and you are so active in the Cornerstone Program, I believe you were like one of the founding committee members on the Cornerstone Program.
The Cornerstone Program had been founded several years prior. I had the privilege of chairing that committee for a couple of years. And you're right. We always felt that the Cornerstone Program in itself was a wonderful program, because it sort of gave lodges a bit of a guideline as to things that they could be doing, and at the same time set a bit of a business plan around how what the lodges could be doing, and giving them the different options of things that they could be doing to stay active. And a lot of that perhaps has also permeated throughout the pandemic as well. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. And this again, one of the great programs that the Grand Lodge continues to push forward.
And I was going to ask you about Cornerstone. I talked with us about Brother Cialtis as well. Both of my lodges did receive their Cornerstone designation certificates, which go from 2020 to 2022. For lodges looking to renew their Cornerstone designation using the work done over the pandemic, because as you rightly pointed out, there was still work being done. There was charity drives, there was
whatever could be done without the within the limitations of the restrictions that were in place at the time.
There was significant work being done, I think, by a lot of lodges to support both their membership and the communities. How will that be, to your knowledge, your understanding? How will that be? How can lodges reflect that work in their Cornerstone applications? Because obviously it may not have taken place during an in-person meeting, but it still was a part of their work.
Yeah, my understanding is that there have been concessions made for the work that has been done through the course of the pandemic, and that those concessions can be found on the website with regards to all of those will be outlined, with the Cornerstone program format on the website. So and I'd be happy to look into that a little further for you. But though all that work that has been done throughout, it is not gone to waste. Of course not.
Now, going back, because I do think the Cornerstone program is a really excellent program, and having you on, who was chair of that committee, like I said, came down to Windsor. How have you found lodges responded to the Cornerstone program, both when you were presenting it, maybe for the first time to lodges, and was there a level of trepidation at the start? Did lodges come around to it? Just what is the response like to the Cornerstone program, both when you were a committee and how have you seen it evolve in lodges over the last several years?
I think like anything that is introduced, there's always going to be, again, like that trepidation as to how it works, what the requirements are, and all of the different elements and how it comes together. What I did find is that once we were able to present it and at the same time just go through it, we started to see a lot of responses, and yours was one of them as well. Like how effective and how simple really it was. That there wasn't that much that would avoid the lodges from being involved in some of these things. Like I said, it's set a guideline in place which allowed the lodges to be more comfortable in the approach. What we did find also was that as the message started to get out there, and one of the approaches that we took was to present it on a regional basis. There was proponents of the program which really helped us as well from the different regions, because they understood the lodges in their area, they understood the districts in their area and the sentiments of the brethren, so they can actually apply those particular requirements of the program to the sentiments of the brethren of their lodges in their areas and in their regions. Absolutely. And can relay that message more effectively. So what we did see is that over the course of my tenure with it, that there was an increase. There was always for a few years, well, during that time, and we're probably seeing that still, is that there was always an increase of anywhere from 20 to 30%, of lodges being involved, with the program itself.
Are you aware of any, and if so, aware of any other Grand Lodge jurisdictions that have similar programs? I've traveled pretty extensively, and every now and then, if I'm in the room or in the meeting or even at the Grand Lodge building itself, I'll bring up the Cornerstone program from the Grand Lodge of Ontario. It seems that it's a pretty unique program to Ontario. A lot of Grand Lodges seem to have programs to recognize individual Masons, Hiram Awards, things of that nature. I guess, are you aware of other Grand Lodges that have similar programs?
Historically, I believe that the program itself was an adaptation of a program that was actually being used by another jurisdiction. At the same time, I believe a couple of years back, it was also requested from another jurisdiction because they had heard about our program and were anxious to see how it worked as well. So yeah, with regards to that, yeah, it's something that when other jurisdictions are hear about it, that it sparks an interest. Absolutely.
Now, going back to kind of the overarching purpose of this series, this interview, the Grand Lodge Candidate Series, one thing I like to ask, I asked it a lot last year, I'm asking again this year. I think I was probably maybe 4 or 5 years into Freemasonry before I really had an understanding as to what Grand Lodge was. It was discussed in lodge meetings and I'd hear it brought up locally, but if you had asked me what precisely it is they're referring to, I would have had no idea really, beyond, kind of a mythic organization that sits, is somewhere in the GTA and tells us what to do. But I would have no idea specifically as to what it is. And to be honest, and this is something I regret now looking back, as a newer, younger Mason, I didn't really feel it was necessary for me to learn about Grand Lodge. I was happy to just go to the meetings and not really worry about anything beyond what was for dinner afterwards type of thing. Now, I guess, as somebody who's been a part of Freemasonry at the lodge and the Grand Lodge level for a while, been on committees, been part of the programs, what would you say to newer Masons about Grand Lodge and why it's important, or why they should take the time to learn and understand what Grand Lodge actually is and how it impacts Masonry at the lodge level?
What I've been able to see with participation in at the Grand Lodge level is that the different programs that are developed to assist their brethren in any possible way that they can. I don't see Grand Lodge as a control factor. I see it more as a body that assists the craft in any areas that they may need. That's basically what I've been able to see just with my participation on the different committees, on the different pillars. That's pretty well what I see Grand Lodge as. Okay, as whenever the lodges, we can't say that Grand Lodge is there as a control factor. It's there more to assist. Okay, the craft is built on the autonomies of the lodges and the districts, and we're there to assist in any way that we possibly can. And I can say that wholeheartedly based on the experiences, having worked on many committees and having worked at the Grand Lodge level for quite some time. And so say, for instance, very similar to what we were just talking about, the Grand Lodge component. I mean, the Cornerstone component. That in itself, okay, was to assist, the lodges in maybe seeing certain things that could help their lodges grow, and to help their membership grow, and at the same time, help the brethren, the newer Masons, understand what Masonry is by revealing some of these programs, or even putting some of these programs together, where we can actually come out and talk about it, and at the same time, with the newer Masons being present, they come away with it with a better understanding, perhaps, or a more clear understanding, not a better understanding, but a clearer understanding to some of the programs.
The communication, the in-person portion of the communication, July 20th to 21st, to any Masons who are considering attending, I guess, what would you say to them about I've always encouraged any Mason who can, work, things like that, and can interfere, but if you can make it to Grand Lodge, the value of doing so and of meeting brothers from all across Ontario. It's one of those Masonic things that's really, it's a big part of the Masonic year and the Masonic journey and career. Yep. In your experience, again, though, I don't know if I ever went as a younger slash newer Mason. I don't think I went till I was maybe junior warden, maybe even senior warden. What would you say to maybe some newer, younger Masons interested in attending the in-person annual communication, especially this year, now that it's not at the Royal York, which might make it more cost effective for brothers to attend, and it's only 2 days, not the full amount. Just what are your thoughts about newer, younger Masons going and taking part in Grand Lodge?
Absolutely. I would say by all means, please attend, simply because they'll have an opportunity to see a lot of different things. Like one of the things that you had just asked, the seminars. The seminars are going to be put on by the different committees, the different pillars that are working on certain things, and that there's a perfect opportunity, okay, to get a general feel of what Grand Lodge does, okay, just off of those seminars, because those presentations are going to be presented by the pillars, by the different committees. So here's a great opportunity to see what the work that Grand Lodge is doing, okay, on behalf of the brethren. At the same time, like to really get a good feel of the whole event itself, to participate in Grand Lodge, to see how Grand Lodge actually works. Like it's like a big lodge meeting, but on a Grand Lodge level. Okay, and discussions that are had, all of the different protocols that I think that they would find fascinating. I know I did, and I know many people that do come to Grand Lodge, really look forward to it because of that.
Do you suspect, or as much as it's always hard to predict the future, but I'll ask for a prediction. This year it's no longer at the Royal York, it's at the Sheraton. Do you suspect that we may see in future years Grand Lodge continue to move and perhaps move, or the annual communication continue to move and perhaps move outside of the GTA and travel up and down maybe the 401 or to some other locations within Ontario? The possibility of having Grand Lodge communications take place in other districts outside the GTA. What are your thoughts on that as a possibility? And do you think it would be a benefit, or what are the potential benefits versus drawbacks?
I'm thinking that you'll probably I think you'll probably, there's a probability that you will see this. It's a different approach, but at the same time, like it's not that big of a different approach, because prior to the mid 30s, okay, that's how Grand Lodge operated. The Grand Lodge communications were done, in different cities, in not necessarily a rotation, but if you were to go through the proceedings, you'll see where they were actually taking place. Okay, and they were being, the communications were being held in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Kingston, London, Windsor, North Bay. So that's a wonderful consideration, simply because you're spreading that. You're spreading that event, okay, throughout the province, and allowing the different brethren to participate in a different way than having to try to commute to only one particular area. So there are going to be benefits to that if in fact it goes that route.
Yeah, and that leads me to think about not a vetting process, but would districts, I should say, would districts then, campaign Grand Lodge to come to Windsor, home of, go to Spitfire?
Wouldn't that be a wonderful situation where, it's given to the highest bidder or something along those lines? I just say this in jest, but there's an interesting thought.
Yeah,
but
doesn't have to be highest bidder per se, but the person, the
No, for
district
lack of a better
most,
term, obviously, I
yeah,
didn't mean like it's
yeah,
going to be something that you bid on, but
but the district that can most promote its community,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
the Grand Lodge brings in, I don't know what the numbers are. And it'll be interesting to see what the numbers are this year, but I would think 300-400 Masons at least to downtown Toronto, to the Royal York in years past,
But
three to four hundred.
wouldn't you see that also as as another approach to spread the craft?
Oh, I would 100%. I mean, 300 to 400 people in downtown Toronto might be a drop in the bucket, but 300 to 400 people, 300 to 400 Masons plus families, spending a week in Ottawa, spending a week in Windsor, in London, in North Bay. Maybe you could do something, if you want to go crazy, try to do something in Kenora. Like, that's significant economic benefit to those communities, to the restaurants,
Absolutely.
hotels. Like, it goes to show that the way Freemasonry can be a benefit to not just Masons, but to the community as a whole. And you may even have communities then getting involved, and also, having mayors of cities, Grand Lodge, come here. We have these things to offer you. Mayor of North Bay, we have these beautiful things to offer you. It's a way to show.
It's community outreach in a specific form in that regard. Absolutely. And going back to the regionality of it, okay, where we experience the regionality of Masonry, as opposed to just in that particular form on for that particular event. Yeah, so absolutely, yeah, I can see benefits.
Oh yeah, that's one thing I really love. The regionality of Freemasonry, whether it be in North America and Ontario. I love to travel. It's
Yeah.
one of the major parts of the craft, and it's so much fun to go to. I go to a lodge in Kentucky and they're all drinking bourbon, and then you go to a lodge in Texas and they got the cowboy hats on, and you go to a lodge in Missouri. You go to they all have funny accents. Sorry, Missouri, but all these different. I just love the regionality of it, where you can travel around, and wherever lodge you're at, there's something new to see and experience and learn about the culture through that lodge. And in the same way, sitting in a Grand Lodge Communication or even a lodge in North Bay is going to be different and unique than sitting in one in Windsor, in Ottawa. I think showcasing that could be a really fun thing for the craft if it's done at the Grand Lodge level.
Mhm.
And maybe this is the first step, maybe baby steps. We're outside of downtown Toronto. Maybe next year we're outside of Toronto altogether. Who knows?
Well, we'll see how things play out, but yeah, there's great opportunity there.
I like that word, opportunity. Again, asking you to predict the future, which is kind of a fool's game, but nonetheless,
I don't know. I think my crystal ball over the course of the last few years has still been in the repair shop.
mine
But
too.
I'll do the best that I can.
I think most people's has been, but if you did have to look into the future, what are some opportunities? What are both some opportunities and perhaps some challenges that you see in the coming years for Freemasonry, either in Ontario or just generally throughout the world?
I think the opportunities that we have, and this is based on a lot of the studies that our particular pillar has been working on with regards to community outreach. The one thing that we have been working on is our new brand identity and branding component. But part of that all came from also studies that we've been looking at.
Sorry, before you go on, can you define the term brand?
The brand itself is a brand identity. Okay. So if you were to take a look at, if you see anything out there now that says Ontario Masons with the square and compass within the maple leaf, that's the brand identity that we're talking about. That's what has been actually, that the committee has been moving forward with. And basically what that is an identity. okay, that is associated with the Masons of Ontario. Okay, very similar to any identity that you would have, a brand identity that you would have with a particular product, that once you see that identity, like say for instance, and I hate to use, let's say Rolex. Okay, when you see that word Rolex, you know, okay, what it stands for. It'll stand for a particular quality in time wear, you know, that sort of thing. That's exactly what we were looking for also with a brand identity with Ontario Masons. So as part of that research, there was a lot of studies that have been done in the northern jurisdiction and, you know, within Masonry itself. That we do have a generation that is really looking for something. Okay? It's looking for a place it's looking for a home. Okay, not necessarily particular denomination in religion or anything like that, but they are looking for something that we have to offer. There's a lot of you know, young men who are looking, you know, towards what Masonry really is. So we have that opportunity to continue to grow, okay, and continue to send out our message as a craft, okay, and what we stand for. And I think what it is that we do stand for is exactly what they're looking for. So we have great opportunities there. Okay, the challenge, and I wouldn't say challenges, because I know that Masonry as a whole has been working towards that. How do we get that message across to the newer generations?
I wonder, and this is, I've brought this up before, and these items aren't necessarily mutually exclusive by any means or in conflict, but to what extent are people or young men looking for, you know, as you put it, looking for a home that perhaps Freemasonry can provide, versus to what extent are they looking for a challenge or something difficult to overcome? Because I've discussed this in terms of, and not that it was certainly done very well, that not just a Mason, and my problem with a lot of the communication that's been done about Freemasonry. There's a great example of a commercial done from Grand Lodge of Australia about the craft. Mm-hmm. It all seems to be emphasizing, I think, the wrong thing, which is this idea of Freemasonry as, you know, a place to make friends and meet cool people, and you know, you can have a drink with the guys afterwards, and it's something new. And I've always thought that what's likely going to be more appealing to people is the idea of Freemasonry as a challenge. Like, it's hard work to be a good Freemason, right? Anybody who thinks it's easy has never put on a first degree, right? And anybody who thinks it's easy has never been a lodge secretary. Anybody, you know, it's because it seems that, and you know, Jordan Peterson has talked about this. I'm not saying he's always right, but I think he's right on this point. It seems that more and more what people are searching for is something that can challenge them, that can actually be hard work, so they can feel as though if they accomplish it, they can overcome it. And I think, to me, what Freemasonry needs to emphasize is, you know, if you want to be a Mason, it's actually a challenge. This is actually hard work to be a good Mason. You can be a crappy Mason, that's easy. You just join and pay your dues and never come out. But if you want to be good at it, it takes hard work and practice and dedication.
It's like anything else. I think that if you really want the benefits of something, you really have to get involved with it to understand what it is that it's all about. Like, the benefits that we get out of Masonry are really, it's all there. It's up to us as individuals to explore it. Okay, now whether we explore it through through our rituals, through our charges, through our protocols, and truly understand how it means and how it's impacted us, then it does make us better people. Not better than anybody else, but better people amongst ourselves, like for ourselves, to be a better person. I had mentioned that before, that you'll get that information from testimonials from the different brethren, but you're absolutely right. It does. The challenge is, how much are you prepared to do? Okay. And that's basically, Masonry lays it all out for you. Okay. It's how much are you prepared to do about it? Okay. And how much are you prepared to absorb? How much work are you prepared to do with it? And basically what that does is it teaches you things like commitment. Okay. Once you commit to, say, you commit to an officer lineup, there's a commitment involved. Okay. And that in itself is, those lessons learned you take with you in your day-to-day life.
And, I love that, but that's my concern with perhaps the way Freemasonry is, and this isn't a Grand Lodge.
Well, and the example that you cited, okay, is maybe one component in trying to spark interest. Okay, yeah, meet people, because that is part and parcel of what we do. We do come together. We in fellowship. You do meet great people. I can tell you that. Yeah, I've met some of the finest people in this craft that I never would have been able to meet if I wasn't part of the craft. So the messages, it all depends on the strength of the message. Okay, that or the emphasis on the message as well. Okay, if the emphasis of the message is that, come, it's a great place to meet guys, go for a beer, and that's where the emphasis of the message is, then it hasn't taken the full message into consideration.
And I really love the way you put it. I wish, when communicating about Freemasonry, Grand Lodges throughout the world would take that approach more. That question of, what are you prepared to commit? What are you prepared to do? Are you prepared?
But it's like anything else in life. If we're prepared to, if you take on something, it's the commitment. Okay, the more time, the more commitment, and staying with something. Staying with something is important. Okay, and this is a lesson that Masonry actually teaches us as well. Sticking to a commitment that may take years. Okay, a perfect example is your commitment to an officer lineup, and that commitment is a 7-year commitment. Okay, that in itself is a lesson on its own. Okay, so now you take that lesson learned and you apply it to other things that we do in life. Okay, well there's one lesson right there, but there's so many others, because as we continue as that journey continues, there's other lessons that are learned in the interim. Okay, so yeah, it does make you a better person because of, and it all depends, again, how you apply yourself to it. Okay, now let's take, all things considered, that there are things in life which, life has a tendency of throwing curveballs at us, and absolutely. Okay, and it may impact our level of commitment simply because of circumstance. Okay, but the lessons are in Masonry. Okay, it's up to us to continue to move forward with them.
Do you think that, or how does 2022, the year we're in, the times that we're in, how does that affect the ability for people to commit? I mean, you're hearing a lot about people used to have a job. My dad had the same job for forever and a day, right? And
yeah,
declining, divorce rates are up, and marriages don't last as long, and attention spans are, lowering is what they say. Do you think, or how is, do you think it's still as possible, or how does the times in which we're living affect the ability of a Mason to commit to something for 7 years, 10 years, 25 years?
The idea of commitment was one example. Okay, and we did touch on the fact that life is different now than it was. Okay, so a lot of those interruptions are going to be more prevalent now than they have ever been before. And interruptions, I mean that in a good sense, that there are so many more things, okay, that that we have to deal with. Okay, things that perhaps a generation ago weren't as prevalent as they are now. Okay, a lot more depending on a lot more is demanded of our time in different ways that wasn't like that before. The world is moving in a much quicker pace that may impact our decision to commit to something that may take a bit longer. But it's up to us, as we have in the past, to continue to adapt to these changes. Let's take it into consideration that Masonry has been around for a really long time. And the messages and our approaches, our rituals, all of those things have always been the constant. Okay, it's how we've adapted over the years to the changes in society. And society in itself has been changing. Okay, we're constantly having to adapt to to different approaches. Okay, just things like television, for instance, which weren't something that impacted Masonry when it wasn't there. Okay, Masonry was more of a community thing. Okay, but Masonry continues to adapt and continues to adapt to change. Okay, it's where we just find ourselves at a time right now where we're having to deal with more, perhaps, than we've been accustomed to. Okay, but these changes, we will be overcoming them, and this is what we're constantly doing, trying to determine how we can adapt to these changes. Okay, and by not impacting the constant.
And that's the, I guess, challenge. That's
It's always been the challenge. I think Masonry has always had that challenge. Okay, the interruptions throughout the course of time. Okay, the world conflicts that we've had to adapt to that. That after that, that you've seen that the world has changed and Masonry changed with it. Okay, but the constant has never changed, because the constant is what Masonry is about.
And that constant that Masonry is about, I think that leads us well into your work regarding the brand, right? Regarding brand identity.
Yep.
Is that, what would you say is the goal in branding or rebranding, depending on how you want to put it, the idea of Freemasonry? And are you trying to, are those efforts being addressed or focused on Freemasons themselves? Because there are a lot of Masons out there, right, who maybe joined, but they're no longer sure they understand what Freemasonry is, or they joined maybe perhaps without being properly vetted, so they joined and now they're not sure what they're part of. Versus, are you trying to focus the brand on the community? I guess, where is that work taking you, and what is the target audience of that work?
I think the target audience is the community itself. Okay, by showing a standard brand identity, which is highly recognizable as something that represents Masonry as a whole in Ontario, that gives us a very positive standing in the community. But it also creates an interest for any potential member who may want to inquire more about the craft. When they see something that's pretty standard, but at the same time is highly respected, that in itself is going to be a drawing feature. That's says, I need to know more about this. Okay, so when you're directing them to a particular brand, you want to make sure that you have something that is there for them to see, and that they feel good about participating in.
And with that, right, worshipful sir, you've been kind of around my Masonic orbit ever since Cornerstone, but I've had the chance to attend several lodge events with you, district deputy dinners, and events with you in attendance. And there's no doubt that you've done a great deal of work for the craft in Ontario and the craft as a whole. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the podcast. It's very much appreciated. And you told me before we started, this was your first time on a podcast, so I hope you enjoyed it.
I did, and thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate the invitation. It's been a pleasure, Cameron. It really has. Thank you.